Good morning, everybody. So my name is Jesse, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. For those joining us for the first time, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. And we are particularly excited this May because we are celebrating biodiversity all month long. Amazing creatures, plants, animals all around the world with some of the top scientists around the globe highlighting the importance of ecosystems, coast to coast and around the world. So right now we're joined by 5 classes from across North America. So I want to give them a chance to do a bit of a shout out and say hi. We've got Miss Foster's grade 3-4s in Grimsby, Ontario. Hi, guys. I love Grimsby, Ontario. So seldom get to hear it. Great town. We've got Miss Gert Harry's grade 7s in Brampton, Ontario. Hi, guys. At Mount Royal School, which is like our most popular school. You guys are like, you're never doing classes, you're just with us, which is great. We've got Miss Grimshaw's grade 5s in Freehold and C.R. Applegate. Hi, guys. Hi. More multiple classes there. It's very exciting. All right. We've got Mr. Bresden's grade 3s in Sherwood Park in Alberta. Hi, guys. Hi. So many of you, I love it. We've got Miss Huxley's grade 5s in Brampton, Ontario. Mic not working, but I'm sure they're equally enthusiastic. And then Miss Charles's group, also in Brampton, Ontario, grade 6s, just joined us as well. So welcome in, guys. And of course, the reason you guys are all here today is for our speakers. So we are joined live in Toronto, where I am as well, by Dr. Shelby Riskin at the University of Toronto. And she studies what happens when you turn wild places like tropical forests, and in particular the Amazon rainforest, sort of the most rich biodiverse area in the entire world, into things like farms or cities that humans live in. So it's a great fit for our May month. We look very forward to hearing a lot more about what you do, Dr. Riskin, and thanks so much. And take it away.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Are we good? Okay,
we're good.
Great. So thanks for the nice introduction, Jesse. Hey, everybody, I'm so excited to see all of you here today. I can't wait to chat with you. So I am a teaching professor at the University of Toronto, and I study ecology. Particularly, people call it ecosystem ecology. So an ecosystem is sort of all the plants and animals and fungi and bacteria, all the living things in a particular place, and all of the not living things that support those organisms. So the trees, the water, the rocks, the soil, all of that stuff. And so I work in the Amazon. So let me get up my slides here. Okay, hopefully you can all see that. Okay, great. So this is a picture from my field site. And what you can see here is the tropical rainforest in the background. This is in the Brazilian Amazon. Although it might not look too much like a big, lush tropical rainforest to you right here. So this area has been cleared to be turned into a farm, a big farm that grows soybeans. And so some of the questions that I ask are about what happens after this deforestation, after you clear all of those plants and trees away, which is what we call deforestation. What happens to the environment? What's different about the water and the streams and in the lakes? If there's any changes to the soils. And it may seem boring a little bit, to study the dirt and the water in a place that has jaguars and sloths and venomous snakes. But in fact, none of those animals would be able to live there without all of that good stuff, all of that supporting ecosystem behind it. So being a field ecologist has let me go to just these incredible parts of the world that I would never otherwise have the chance to visit. And some of the issues I've gotten to work on, like this one, are some of the sort of biggest challenges that we face as a global society, and that all of you will think about a lot during your lifetimes, I'm sure. But I've also gotten the chance to do things like chemistry in the rainforest. So I'm going to try to tell you a little bit about those big questions and a little bit about what it's like to work in the field. So this is a map of the globe. Most of you are probably familiar with what it looks like. And this particular map shows you where in the world we farm. So everything that's in yellow here, or that's in green or orange, is parts of the world that are farmed. And we cover about 43% of the Earth's land surface with some form of farming, and that is a lot. That is more than any other kind of land use. In comparison, the amount of land that's covered by cities, where I think almost all of us are living, that takes up maybe 3% of the land surface on Earth. So much, much, much less land. But what I actually think is more interesting about this map is where we don't farm. So take a look at all of the areas that are gray. You can see that, oh, let me see if I can show these one at a time. Okay, so you can see here, there's gray at the top and at the very bottom, the north and south poles. And so we can't farm here because it's frozen, it's tundra. We can't farm the tundra. Where else do we not farm? Here, the global deserts. We've got the Sahara Desert there, we've got the Gobi Desert, we've got Australia's desert. And then there's one more big world region where we don't do farming, or we don't do much of it. And that is the world's remaining tropical forests. Now, humans don't really know how to grow food in the desert or in the tundra, but we do know how to grow food in the tropical forest. And the reason we don't do it is because it's a dense tropical forest. And so this is where we're seeing the most deforestation today. We're facing this big global challenge where in just a few decades, within many of your lifetimes, we will have 10 billion people on Earth, and we have to feed everybody, and we are running out of space. So if we're almost doubling the population, we certainly don't have a double Earth that we can farm to feed everybody. So we are clearing now into those tropical rainforests to make space for the crops that we need to support feeding people, although that's not the full story. So the big question for me was, as we clear these tropical forests and we start to put in farms, what's going to happen to those ecosystems? And can we do it well enough that the ecosystem lasts to see another day and we still have those jaguars and sloths and caimans and all of those amazing wild animals living there? So deforestation matters. And here are three big global reasons that even a small-scale deforestation can matter. So one, all of those forests support a huge number of species. And as Jesse mentioned at the beginning, the Amazon is one of the most biodiverse places on Earth. So here is a picture of a giant anteater. This is an endangered animal that only lives in the Amazon. Just to orient you, its nose is on the right side and its big bushy tail is on the left there. Cutting down rainforests also affects climate. This is because it releases greenhouse gases and contributes to climate change, but also because rainforests have a lot of water cycling through them. And so the climate can be affected by that water too, which I'll talk a little bit more about. And then the soil and the water quality can really dramatically change when a landscape is changed from a forest to something else. And people and animals and organisms all depend on clean water and healthy soils to survive. So here's what it looks like when you look over a tropical rainforest like the Amazon from above. It has that thick, intact canopy of trees. It looks pretty dense, and it looks pretty shady underneath there, right? Now, when we get into an area that's been cleared for farming, and you take a picture from overhead, it ends up looking something more like this. This is a picture close to my field site, not exactly where I've been working, but it looks more similar to the places where many of us live. So if any of you guys have been in an airplane flying over the Midwest in the United States or the prairies in Canada or even Southern Ontario, a lot of it looks not unlike this, right? We use pieces of land as green space set aside as forest, like you can see in the middle. We have areas that we farm, so that kind of reddish soil in the upper left-hand corner is a cleared field that's ready to be farmed. Now, the area in between that's kind of green here, I'm not sure this will come across in your projections of this slide, but what you actually see here is not a crop. Instead, it's a forest that's been cut down. So the way they cut down these forests is they take very, very large tractors with a huge chain in between, and they drive it through the trees, kind of pulling all of the plants and foliage down with them. And then they use bulldozers to push all of that plant material together, and then they burn that plant material to reveal the bare soil that then they can farm. And so this picture is interesting to me in that it shows you the land in different stages of going from a rainforest to a farm field. Now, for a long time, the Amazon was deforested, or forest was cut down there, mostly to make space for cattle ranching, for pasture. So here is a cow grazing in this area. But as you can see, this looks pretty different than a green tropical rainforest. So the grass around here is brown, the trees barely have leaves. Now this is during the dry season, but pasture's not very productive or successful here. And so the cattle weren't able to support themselves for very long, and it led to increases in deforestation as farmers kept moving into other areas of the Amazon to clear more and more space for cattle. But now, more recently, we've started growing big crops in the Amazon, and most of this actually is soybeans. So the fields now in this region look like this. This is a soybean field that's pretty ready for harvest, and that bird walking through is an American rhea. This is a bird, it's sort of like a small ostrich, and it's native to the grassland to the south of the Amazon forest. It's a beautiful bird and feeds on these big soybean fields. So these soybeans are now as productive as the soybean fields that we have in North America. And so by the numbers, the farming has been really successful. So maybe not all of you know what a soybean is. You might have had soy milk or tofu or even soy sauce. All of those products are made from soybeans, although that is not where the soybeans from these fields go. So these soybeans are all harvested and sent to other countries and used as animal feed. So it's used to support animals that then are used for meat. It's done on a very large scale. So here is not a mountain or a hill, but a mound of harvested soybeans in the region of the Amazon where I work that are ready to be shipped out as animal feed. So it's happening on a very big scale. So before I get into what I was doing here, I just wanted to mention briefly what kind of influences farming can have on the environment. So we've seen lots of ways that farming impacts the environment again, in North America, where we've been doing this sort of big scale farming for a really long time. One of the main ways that farming can impact the environment negatively is through fertilizer pollution. So sometimes all plants need nutrients, just like we need vitamins and nutrients to grow, so do plants. And if plants are grown on the same land year after year, they take up a lot of nutrients from the soil. They pull up the nutrients they need from their roots, and so without replacing those nutrients somehow, are we still good?
Yeah, we're still good.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So farmers.
Oh, no, we're not good anymore.
Okay.
I don't know what's going on. It's okay. You were good for the whole time until the last like 20 seconds.
Okay. What do we need to do?
Sorry, we got a last thing needed. Here we go. That should do it. Good. We're good. We're good again. You're
okay,
fine.
Great. So farmers put fertilizers on fields to feed their plants, to provide nutrients. Fertilizer isn't taken up by plants and is left in the soil. And some of that can enter streams and lakes. And when that happens, the fertilizer can fertilize the streams and lakes. And this fertilization effect makes big algae blooms in these water bodies, making it impossible for light to penetrate to the organisms that live in the lakes and streams. And eventually, as that algae dies and is decomposed, it uses up the oxygen in the water such that fish and all of the other animals and plants that use that aquatic ecosystem have trouble surviving. That phenomenon, that process, is called eutrophication. Here's a picture of an extreme version of eutrophication. This is a lake that neighbors some farming, especially pig farming. This is Lake Winnipeg, and serves as a good example of nutrient pollution. So we know that this can happen in these big farming situations. We've learned how to manage it better in North America, but we don't know what's going to happen in the tropics, or we didn't know. And so this is what I was really interested in. Are we going to see these same big impacts with the same kind of fertilizer use in the tropics? So let me show you my field site and a little bit about what I did. So this is a map of the northern half of South America. The raised area in the middle is what people call the legal Amazon. So it's all of the land in Brazil that has streams and rivers that flow into that big Amazon River that then empties into the ocean. Now you can see three different kinds of land represented in this picture. In green is the forest, the intact rainforest. In yellow are the areas that have been deforested, the areas where trees have been cut down. And then in white is a different ecosystem altogether that in Brazil is called the Cerrado, and this is a savanna type landscape. So where deforestation is happening, you can see it along that edge. It's sort of like a backwards, or like a U kind of on the edge. We call that the arc of deforestation. And the farm where I was working is called Tanguru Ranch, and it's highlighted there in red. And that's not just a dot to show you where it's located, that's the size of the farm. It's very big. It's about 800 square kilometers, which is about the size of New York City, the whole thing, all the boroughs, everything. It takes hours to drive from one end to the other. And about half of it is in forest and half of it is farmed. So this is what the forest there looks like when you're inside it. And you can see that it's kind of shady. There's a lot of water. It looks moist and lush. And I want you to think for a minute, if you think it would be hotter to stand here or to stand here. So here is a soybean field that's just adjacent to that forest where I took that other photo. And you can just intuitively, you can imagine that here it's much hotter. And not only is it hotter, it's drier. So when you take out those big trees, you reduce the shade, you increase the heat, and you decrease the moisture that's held into this ecosystem. And in fact, it's so extreme that during the dry season, when there aren't soybeans growing, it ends up looking a little bit like the surface of Mars, and you end up seeing these big dust tornadoes. This is a dust tornado going across one of the empty soybean fields. People call them dust devils. And that was pretty common for us to see there. Now, we also see lots of animals. So this area has been deforested, but that doesn't mean that the animals were able to move somewhere else. So there's a huge amount of wildlife that makes use of these soybean fields and highlights, I think, the importance of making space to keep some of these forest fragments intact so that these animals still have habitat to survive. So this is a rhea with a bunch of babies. They probably aren't all her babies. She's probably babysitting some other female rhea's young as well. This is right outside of the house where I stayed. We get armadillos burrowing in the soil close by. This is a tapir. Tapirs are sort of notoriously shy and difficult to see, but you see a lot of them in the soybean fields. It's a yummy snack apparently for them. Here's a baby tapir. This next photo, I wish I had, I should have put an arrow on it or something, but hopefully you can see in sort of the center of the photo, just to the left of the center, there's a little snorkel sticking up in the water. And that's actually the nose of one of these tapirs swimming across the pond. Here he is, he's gotten to the other side and is just looking out back at us. This is a burrowing owl. We get those in Canada too, actually, although it's not the same group. They don't migrate from place to place, but it is the same species. Again, there's that giant anteater, a very cute little tortoise. And again, these are all in the fields themselves. They're not in the neighboring forests. A macaw right at the edge of the forest. A toucan also at the edge of the forest. Now this guy, we also see some very unusual animals. This is an animal called an amphisbaenid. Sometimes people call it a worm lizard. It's a reptile, but it burrows underground. It's a carnivore. It eats little invertebrates, worms, insects underground. And because it lives underground, it's really lost most of its eyesight. Its eyes are highly reduced. They're on the left-hand side of the screen. So its head is on the left, its tail is on the right. And they actually have really powerful jaws and pretty sharp teeth. But there are so many unusual animals. The biodiversity is so great here. And these are the animals that can tolerate the soy, but you can imagine that there are many other animals that are sort of trapped in the shaded forest fragments that remain too. Now, of course, there are also people in this area. So the farm where I was working is adjacent to one of the biggest indigenous parks in Brazil, where 16 different groups make their home. And actually, our research group first came to this area because one of these groups complained that the streams going through their village were becoming muddy, were getting filled with sediment, and they were concerned that it was because of the soybean farming and the increase in deforestation in their area. And so part of our water quality study was also to think about human well-being and what will happen downstream of these farms. So we did a lot of both soil and water sampling to see where that fertilizer is going, if it's getting to streams, if it's causing a reaction. This is how we sampled for soils. So this is my colleague, Michela. She's a Brazilian woman, and she was taking a soil sample with a core. So you just turn that handle and you can take samples from different depths in the soil. We also did a lot in the streams themselves. Here I am setting up a sampler. You can see that tube that's hanging over the branch. That's to suck water out of the stream at different times. And then that PVC pipe just to the right of me is where we kept a little logger that measured temperature and water depth over time so that we could look at what the river was doing throughout the year. Here we are taking some water samples in the field. One thing that I really love about field work is that you have to get really creative. You, of course, bring down as many supplies as you think you'll need to preserve your water samples and do the chemistry you need to do in the field. But sometimes you have to kind of make your own way to do things the best you can. There aren't shops around. There aren't places to buy a new battery if something dies. You can see next to my friend Janine there, who's got the brown bottle, there's a machete sticking up in the ground. And we always do carry machetes with us while we work here for getting through some of that dense flora, basically, all of those big plants and vines if we need to. Here's a little bit more chemistry beside the stream. We're preserving these samples with chemicals so that all of the living things in them don't start making our sample look different over time. You can see here too that below my knee, I've got something brown on there. That's called a snake chap. We always wear snake chaps so that if you get bitten by a snake, it doesn't bite your skin, but just these sort of tall pieces of thick fabric. So here's an example of an experimental design we we made just using what we could find at the closest hardware store. We cut a PVC pipe here, added a funnel and a tube to a bucket, and this let us measure rainwater that was falling through the forest canopy. So we could see if the rainwater picked up any nutrients or dust or anything else from the surface of the leaves themselves. Now, I made use of these little machines. They kind of look like R2-D2, and you can program them to take water samples at different times. We'd put them out in the streams. Here's what they look like inside. You can see you can fill 24 bottles over time. We'd set them up hooked up to a car battery that's under that bin there. And then the bottle and the funnel hanging to the side was another sort of invention we made so that we could trigger these collectors to start collecting during rainstorms. So as rain falls in that funnel and starts to fill that bottle, eventually it's going to hit a sensor that turns the machine on. So we don't have to be in the forest with it to turn it on. Here's a spider who made a home on one of my machines. I met it every time I went out to collect my samples. I didn't realize until later that it is one of the most venomous spiders on Earth. Had I known, I probably wouldn't have been able to deal with it as well, though, so maybe it was better I didn't. This is a handle of a machete that's being swarmed by sweat bees. There are these little bees, they don't sting, that really love human sweat, and so they are going after it. You can imagine what they try to do to your face based on what this machete looks like. Now, when you work in an area like the Amazon, you always put your boots upside down against the wall when you sleep. But there was one night when I did do that, and I woke up in the morning and I took my boots. I even tapped them on the wall for good measure to make sure nothing had crawled in during the night. I put them on. One didn't fit quite right, and it felt like something was in the toe. So I took my foot out really slowly and I banged it really hard against the wall, and this guy jumped out, a big tarantula. We saw lots of cool tarantulas. None of them bit me, but that was a surprise of a lifetime for sure. Here's a spider with little spiderlings on its back, a centipede, a beautiful stink bug. Now, oh, and a frog who has just caught a moth. This frog lived in our bathroom. And here's a cashew. I thought maybe you guys hadn't thought about where a cashew comes from. This is a cashew fruit, and on the bottom of the fruit is the nut. You can see it's kind of shaped like a cashew, and you take the nuts off and roast them, and those are the nuts that we eat and enjoy. You can imagine how many cashew fruits it takes to fill a big jar of cashews. Now, eventually, what we found out doing all of this water sampling, all of this soil sampling, is that the soils in Brazil and in the Amazon and in the tropics in general are really unique. We don't have any soils like them where we live. And this picture shows you you can see how different they are. So on the left is a picture of soil you might see in a farm field in Canada or the United States. And on the right, you see a picture of soil from my field site. And these incredibly unique soils have really unique properties that hold on to that fertilizer much more powerfully than the soils we have here. And so in fact, so far, we don't see a lot of fertilizer pollution leaving these farm fields. So that's good news. It's, of course, still dangerous news in the sense that when you continue to cut down this rainforest and you continue to sort of change the local climate and you continue to cut up these habitats, it's still a threat for wildlife. But we aren't seeing the same downstream impacts of this kind of farming that we've seen in other places. So that gives me a lot of hope. It suggests that as we can figure out how to do farming better and how to use sort of our best practices and best farming knowledge to farm what we have already cleared, hopefully we can keep the rest of the forest intact and work on keeping those ecosystems as undamaged as possible while we continue to use the ones we have begun to use. So with that, I think I went a little over time, but I will stop talking to you and hopefully take some questions. Thank you so much for listening.
Outstanding, Dr. Riskin. That was super cool. And we've never seen cashews or amphisbaenias before, so that was like a totally new thing. All right, so for our classes, we're going to start with Ms. Foster's class, and I'm going to go one by one through you guys, so just get ready. But if you guys have a question in Ms. Foster's group, come on up.
Yeah, ask your question.
How scared were you when you found out the tarantula was in your shoe?
I was very scared, and in truth, I was alone, but still screamed really loudly. But managed to get my camera.
Perfect. As long as the camera is a part of it, that's what matters. Proof of the giant tarantula. All right, Miss Kurt Harvey's class, if you guys have a question.
Are there a lot of people employed in? Okay.
Yep.
So are there? Okay. So are there a lot of people employed in this farm?
That is a great question. The answer is complicated, but the short answer is not as many as you would expect. So the whole farm is owned by one of the biggest soybean corporations in the world. And so very few people live and work on the farm every day. But during the times of year when they plant and when they harvest, then people come in, typically workers from sort of the interior of the Amazon forest, come down and work for short periods of time. So over the course of the whole year, probably a few hundred people are employed by the farm, but permanently all the time, it's probably less than 100.
Okay. Before we go into our third question, just want to make 2 quick notes. We've got some groups watching on YouTube Live, so you guys can type questions in there and I'll pass them on. And Miss Huxley's class, I know you guys have had some tech difficulties, but if you want to type questions in, top left of your screen, blue square, white lines, you can type them in there. That said, let's go to Miss Grimshaw's group. If you guys have a question, come on up.
When you encounter an animal, how do you help it? What do you do?
When you encounter an injured animal, did you say?
Yeah.
That's a great question. For any of us here, you should ask a grown-up to help you. You should keep the animal still, and you can call for help. There are a number of really neat wildlife organizations all over Ontario and wherever you live that you can call. So have a grown-up call. If it's a baby animal, you can put it in a box and keep it safe. But be sure not to touch the animal yourself and ask a grown-up first. But you can always call. Lots of animals are saved all the time.
And then in the Amazon itself, if you're in the forest, if you're in the farm and you run across an animal that happens to be injured, is there anything you can do, or is that difficult because of the scale of the place?
It's very difficult to help an animal in the Amazon. Luckily, I never ran into an animal that was injured enough to need my help to not be able to run away or take care of itself. We did actually adopt a few dogs that were injured and had run away, and we did help them get healthy again. There was one who had his tongue had been cut almost in half, but he would always follow me on runs and would protect me and ended up staying with me the whole time I worked down there. So lots of nice animal stories too. Perfect.
All right, Mr. Breston's group, you guys have a question. I've got you demuted. You're good to go. Oh, no, I can get you. Don't worry. You're good. There you go.
What kind of animals did you see in the river?
Whoa, good question. So one of the coolest animals that I actually did go in the river with was an anaconda, which is a very big snake. It's a constrictor, so sort of like a python or a boa constrictor. It constricts its prey by wrapping around rather than with venom. But there are also lots of fish, and in fact, I didn't put it in, but some scary fish and some really beautiful fish. There were a few fish species, kinds of fish there that had never been found anywhere else on Earth, only in these little streams on this little farm. They probably live elsewhere, but this is the only place they'd ever been seen and identified. So lots of neat wildlife in the rivers.
Very cool. And for the classes, just because I'm a huge snake fan, if you look from one end of your classroom to the other end, that's about how long an anaconda is. So, or they can get. So check that out. It's a monstrous snake. It's wonderful. All right. We got a question from Ms. Huxley's class online. So are the growing seasons similar to ours? What time of year are the soybeans harvested?
Great question. No, they're not the same as ours. So there are basically 2 seasons there. A rainy season that lasts from about the early October through the end of April, about a month ago. And then there's an extreme dry season between May and, say, September, when less than 2% of rainfall comes down. And so they grow in that rainy season. You can do a double crop and actually get 2 rain-fed crops planted and harvested in that time. And then the fields remain empty during the dry season.
Cool, great question. Actually, Dr. Riskin, just a quick follow-up for classes that might not have had a chance to go near the equator before. So here in Ontario, and certainly for our US classroom too, there's this long twilight period once the sun sort of sets. And what happens in the equator?
Yeah, so at the equator, the days are split basically half and half, and night comes very quickly. So there are about 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of nighttime, and there's not as much of that lovely sunset dusk period that we get here, for sure.
It's sunny and it's black. It's great. Very cool. All right, let's go back to Miss Foster's class. If you guys have a second question, come on up.
We're going to pass it to Zach.
What would happen if there's an animal in a tree cutting it down?
Wow, what a neat question. That certainly must happen because they don't look ahead of time necessarily when they're cutting down trees. But hopefully the animal can escape and run away into a quieter part of the forest, but otherwise it might be killed. Yeah, I've never been part of the deforestation process, so I've never seen that happen. But yes, it might be, I'm sure it would be very scary for the animals. And I don't know how many escape and how many do not.
Good answer, difficult question, but yeah, that is the case when we do, we pay forest. All right, Miss Gert-Hardy's class, if you guys have a question, second one, come on up.
What corporations own these farms and are they Brazilian?
Great question. Yes. So this farm is owned by a corporation called Maggi, M-A-G-G-I, and they are a Brazilian company. And in fact, Andre Maggi, who owns the company, or at least did, last time I checked, was also the governor of the state of Mato Grosso, where the farm is located. So they're very much tied to Brazil. Cool.
Ms. Huxley's class typed in a question which I think a lot of people wanted to ask, which is how venomous was this spider on your device? Like what kind of spider? What's going on?
Well, so I've gotten into arguments before by saying it's the one of the most venomous spiders on Earth, in the sense that it may not kill the highest number of people on Earth, but it's got very powerful venom. So I don't know the details of how long it would take for it to kill you, or how big a person you would have to be to really suffer from its bite, but it is one of the most venomous spiders.
Hard to do that sort of research, I find, too. There's no one willing to, be inflicted, so.
Totally, exactly.
Excellent. All right, Miss Grimshaw's class, if you guys have a second question, come on up.
How does the soil affect like spiders and lizards that live under it?
What a cool question. So soils or lizards and insects and worms and all of the animals that live in soil depend on it for nutrients and for water. So when you dry out a soil, again, thinking about if you imagine standing in that nice lush forest and then you imagine standing in that soybean field, the surface of the soil is going to be different. And lots of those animals, like the lizard you mentioned, or other sort of soil animals, or maybe the worm lizard is what you were asking about specifically, they like it on the forest floor where it's shady and wet and moist and cool. They don't like it as much in the soybean fields, which sort of further reduces the number of species that can live there, both the number that we see and that are easy to love and look at and appreciate, and those small ones that live under the soil surface.
Excellent. We are whipping through questions. We're going to have a whole third round. This is going great. Mr. Bresden's class, if you guys have a second one, come on up.
What's your favorite animal?
Oh my gosh, what a cool question. Let me think about this. My favorite animal in general, I usually say, is a fox. I love foxes. But my favorite Amazonian animal is likely, there are so many that are so incredible and are only found there. So I'm drawn to those. The giant the giant armadillo is one that I never saw in person, but I saw a lot of evidence of, like its big burrows. There were some stories about people who worked on our farm jumping on one's back. And that is one, that's like a quest animal that it might not be my favorite in the whole world because all animals are wonderful, but it is one I really want to see.
I really urge the classes to look up a giant armadillo. You may have seen the little cute ones that roll up into a ball. The giant armadillo is like something from another planet. It's super cool. Do check it out.
It is.
Before we do the third round of questions, I just do a quick question because we haven't got it yet, Dr. Riskin. So how did you get where you are? With a lot of classes, we find people think that scientists are like really good at science when they're really young and that's all they ever wanted to do. And that might be the case for you, but I'm curious if there's any diversions along the way.
Sure. No, I didn't think I was going to be a scientist. When I was the age of all of you, I thought maybe I would be an artist or a dancer or a writer. And it wasn't until I got to university, actually, that I took a biology class and had a teacher who was just so inspiring. I had always really loved going outside and camping and exploring what I now know are ecosystems, but at the time was just the woods, and had always felt moved to leave the earth a better place, clean up trash, sort of moved toward environmentalism. And I realized that conservation is a job, and being a conservation scientist is a job, and realized that during university. And then I actually thought about being a dancer instead of a scientist even after university, and finally decided to go to grad school, knowing that it wasn't something you could do later. It wasn't as easy to kind of drop out and then come back. Although you know what? I also want to say that I took a big chunk of time off to raise 3 kids and stayed home quite a bit longer than sometimes people in academics think is okay, and have been very successful with that. So I would encourage all of you to remember that you can be a scientist and a mom or a dad, or as involved in your family as you want to be. So there are lots of different paths for scientists.
Outstanding. That was one of the best answers for that question I've ever got. So thank you for that. We've got a question in Ms. Huxley's class, which is from Gabriel. Have you ever tried eating the cashews straight from the tree?
You know what? I have, except you can't eat them right off the tree. So it's kind of like an acorn. You have to remove some acid from the nut before you eat it. So even the raw cashews, you kind of roast the shell so that those kind of the bad stuff you don't want to eat gets leached out. And then you can crack it open and eat the nut inside. And we did do that, and they were very good.
Excellent. All right. Miss Foster's class, if you guys have a third question, come on up.
Did you know that the snake was in the water?
Yes. That is, so it was sort of at the edge of a pond, and I had my friend watch the snake while I went in to take the water samples, and she was going to tell me if it moved, and it didn't move. It stayed put. And that anaconda was not as long as your classroom, luckily, but it was still pretty big.
Very cool. All right, Ms. Gurdhari's class. Let's get another one.
No question now.
We have no questions.
Don't be shy. It's all good.
A lot of it has been answered.
Yeah, a lot of them have been answered.
Oh, you don't have any more. Okay, that's fine. All good, guys. Well, then we'll wrap up with one from Mr. Bresden's class. If you guys want to end us off. Go for it.
How long did it take to cut those trees from the farm?
Neat question. It takes quite a while. So it's a little bit complicated in that first you pull down those trees, then you bulldoze it all together, then you burn it, then you kind of incorporate it into the soil. And that whole process takes more than a year to get it from a forest to a field that can be farmed. But each step along the way would be hard for me to put an exact time on. I think it depends on how many tractors you have and the scale that you're working at, if you're doing a big field or a small field. But it's about a year from sort of start to finish.
Cool. All right, well, wrapping up, what we always ask at the end is, where can classes learn more? Is there a way to learn more about the research you're doing, learn more about the Amazon rainforest in general? How do we get kids encouraged to, get a little more in touch with forests near them?
That's a great question. So there are lots of places that you can get, that you can learn more about the Amazon. There are lots of nonprofit groups that work there, like World Wildlife Fund. That's a great place to start if you're looking for information about animals. If you're looking for information about deforestation, that's a harder one in that there are less kid-friendly resources around. But there's a group called the Woods Hole Research Center, which I worked with when I was doing my work, and they are really active in working in the Amazon and are really connected to lots of different interesting groups there. And there's also, I don't know how many English versions they have, but there are some really neat groups within Brazil that work on deforestation. In particular, there's one called IPAM, EPAM, and I think they probably have English websites too where kids can learn more about deforestation.
Excellent. And if you guys want any of those resources, please let me know and I'll pass them on. What we do at the end of every hangout, Shelby, is I'm going to demute the microphone of every class. So Ms. Foster's class, Mr. Hardy's class, Mr. Breslin's class. And if boys and girls, you guys could join me in saying a huge thank you to Shelby for joining us today. Awesome, guys. We look forward to having you for the rest of the month. And do check out that newsletter for June. Dr. Riskin, that was marvelous. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you guys. It was such a pleasure.